What is a torsional force?
Force exerted to twist an object.
What is an X-ray?
Electromagnetic wave of very short wavelength or very high energy photons. Emitted by an atom with many electrons that is disturbed by the collision with a high energy particle.
What methods are being used to reduce noise pollution?
Since noise creates stress and can lead to other health problems. Industries and governments around the world are working to reduce noise levels, especially around populated regions. One method of reducing noise pollution around airports has been rerouting airline traffic so that it passes over less populated areas. Sound barriers have been installed along many highways to absorb and slash or reflect sound away from houses built alongside the roads. In countries such as Austria and Belgium, roadways are being constructed with a material called whisper concrete that engineers claim reduces noise by 5 decibels. Finally, Swedish engineers have developed a road surface made of pulverized rubber that can reduce the noise level by as much as 10 decibels.
What is an entanglement?
An effect in an atom or nucleus when 2 or 3 photons are emitted. The spin of one photon depends on that of the other, or is entangled with it. Measuring one spin tells you what the direction of the other is.
What happens to an airplane when it is struck by lightning?
Airline pilots tend to avoid thunderstorms, but when a plane is struck by lightning, the passengers inside the plane are kept perfectly safe. For they are inside a Faraday cage, which shields them from the massive electrical charge. The lightning can, however, disturb and even destroy some of the sensitive electronics used to fly the plane. Studies were performed by NASA in the 1980s in which they flew fighter planes into thunderstorms to see how the planes would react to lightning. The scientists quickly found that the planes actually encouraged lightning, because the planes caused increases in the electric field of the cloud, which in turn caused the lightning to hit the plane's metal body. Studies in the 1980s showed that airplanes actually attract lightning. While lightning storms can still be dangerous, passengers inside airplanes are safe from electric shock because they are actually inside a Faraday cage.
What are low-frequency, LF, waves?
Frequency 30 kHz 300 kHz.
What is heat conduction?
Occurs when two objects are in contact, like when you put your hand in hot water.
What is the tallest building in the world?
The tallest building, until recently, was the Sears Tower, now the Willis Tower. In Chicago, Illinois, which was built in 1974 and is 443 meters, 1,453 feet, high. 3 new skyscrapers in Asia now surpass this height. The Petronas Towers in Malaysia, completed in 1996, are 452 meters, 1,483 feet, high. The Shanghai World Finance Center in China, completed in 2008, stands 492 meters. 1,614 feet, high, almost half a kilometer into the sky. The Burj Dubai, Dubai Tower, 818 meters, 2,684 feet, high, the world's highest, opened in January 2010.
How was nuclear fission discovered?
Italian physicist Enrico Fermi, 1901 to 1954. Was appointed professor at the University of Rome at the age of 24. Among many projects in which he and his group were involved, perhaps none was more important than his. Studies of the reactions produced when slow neutrons struck nuclei. Fermi had discovered in 1934 that slowing neutrons by passing them through paraffin greatly increased this ability to produce nuclear reactions. He did systematic studies of the results of bombarding a series of materials with slow neutrons. The German chemist Otto Hahn, 1879 to 1968, had a distinguished career that included inventing the field of radiochemistry in 1905. Using chemical techniques and measurements of half-lives to study the results of nuclear reactions, he had discovered dozens of isotopes and at least one element. 3 times he was nominated for the Nobel Prize. Since 1907 he had collaborated with the Austrian physicist Lise Meitner, 1878 to 1968. The teamwork between a physicist and a chemist was a great advantage. Hahn and Meitner, together with Hahn's young assistant Fritz Strassmann, 1902 to 1980. Employed Fermi's slow neutron techniques to create nuclear reactions, and thus more isotopes. When, in 1938, they tried bombarding uranium with neutrons, they expected to create new elements beyond uranium in the periodic table. But they kept finding the element barium in the bombarded uranium. Starting in 1933, the Nazi regime forced people of Jewish origin out of all laboratories and universities. Meitner, who had Jewish parents but had converted to Protestantism in 1908, was protected because she was Austrian. But, when Austria was incorporated into Germany, she lost that protection. In July 1938, she took the train from Berlin to the Netherlands. Thanks to the intervention of two Dutch physicists, she was allowed to leave Germany. But with no possessions. She soon moved to Sweden and kept up her collaboration with Hahn by mail. On December 17, 1938, Hahn and Strassmann submitted their findings for publication but admitted that they had no explanation for the appearance of barium. Meitner and her nephew Otto Frisch utilized Niels Bohr's liquid drop model of the nucleus and Einstein's E equals mc2 equation to propose that the nucleus had split into two, releasing both extra neutrons and a large amount of energy. The Meitner-Frisch paper was submitted a few days after Hahn's. Frisch returned to his laboratory in England and confirmed Hahn's result in January 1939. Hahn won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his work in 1944, but Meitner never did. It was not long after scientists figured out how to create nuclear fusion that the Nazis began conducting research on how to turn this science into a powerful bomb. Albert Einstein and physicist Leo Szilard urged U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt start a program to complete a nuclear warhead before the Germans did.
Why was plutonium used in bombs?
Plutonium is not found in nature, but it is produced in reactors by bombarding uranium-238 with neutrons. Plutonium-239, 239Pu, can be fissionied by slow neutrons, and so could be used in weapons. In December 1942, Hanford, Oregon, was chosen as a site for reactors that would produce plutonium. Hanford was selected because it was isolated but also on the Columbia River, which afforded a source of cooling water.
Are emission and absorption the only ways light interacts with an atom?
In 1917, Albert Einstein proposed a third way light could interact with an atom. If a photon with the correct energy struck an atom in the excited state, then the atom would be stimulated to emit an additional photon and drop to the lower energy level. The two photons leave with the same energy, in terms of a wave, same wavelength, and in phase.
What is a wave velocity?
Depends upon the material or medium in which it is traveling.
What is mathematical physics?
Study of how physical processes can best be described by mathematics.
What is the conservation of momentum?
The momentum of the system is constant when external forces are zero.
What is the total internal reflection?
Occurs when a ray of light in a medium with a higher index of refraction strikes the interface between that medium and one with a lower index of refraction.
What is a qubit?
Quantum bit, the basic piece of information for a quantum computer.
What is acceleration?
Speed and velocity are seldom constant. Usually they vary, and acceleration is a description of how that variation occurs. Acceleration is called the time rate of change of velocity. That is, it is the change in velocity divided by the time over which the change occurs. For example, a car might accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour. A sports car might do this in 5 seconds, while an economy car might require 9 seconds.
How do liquids evaporate?
A substance does not have to boil to change from liquid to gas state. The boiling point is where the pressure of the water vapor equals the atmospheric pressure. At all temperatures there is a great variation in the kinetic energy of the molecules that make up the substance. When the molecules with high energy reach the surface they have the possibility of escaping into the air. The process of changing from liquid to gas at a temperature below the boiling point is called evaporation. When the molecules with higher energy leave the liquid, the remaining molecules have a lower average energy, and thus a lower temperature. It is cooled by evaporation.
What is the coefficient of kinetic friction Mk?
Coefficient when there is relative motion between the two surfaces. Smaller than static friction.
What is a pinna?
Outer ear. A cartilage flap that forms a transformer to match the impedance of the sound wave in air to that at the end of the ear canal.
What is rotational kinetic energy?
Equivalent of kinetic energy for rotational motion.
What is a dip needle?
Like a conventional compass, but the needle rotates in vertical plane.
What is an electromagnetic spectrum?
The wide range of electromagnetic, waves from low to high frequency.
What is a noise?
Sound intensity at a wide variety of different wavelengths.
Did you ever see a piece of paper attracted to a charged rod, touch it, and then jump away? How would that happen?
If it touched the rod, it became charged with a charge like that of the rod. And so it would now be repelled. A conductor can also be charged after being polarized, but without touching the charged object. If you bring a large metal object, like a pie plate, near a charged rod, the positive charges will move to the far end of the plate. If you now touch this end briefly with your finger, the positive charges will be pushed even further away into your finger. When you remove your finger, the pie plate is negatively charged. This process is called charging by induction. Rubbing a glass rod with silk will achieve the same effect. The glass rod is positively charged, while the silk receives the excess negative electrons. The glass rod can still pick up small objects, but attracts the negative charges in those objects instead of the positive charges. When the pie plate is charged by induction, it will be positively charged.
What are the strengths and weaknesses of nuclear power?
Electric power is produced primarily by plants using hydrocarbon fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. These are usually called fossil fuels and are no longer being created. When they are used up, these resources are gone. Nuclear power plants can reduce our reliance on such fuels. Uranium, however, is also a fossil fuel. Coal mining has significant environmental costs. Oil is used mostly for transportation. Natural gas is relatively clean and is used mostly for home and industrial heating. Another advantage of nuclear power is the reduction in greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide. One major disadvantage of nuclear power is the cost of the plant and the extremely long time scale associated with obtaining approval and constructing the facility. Costs are difficult to calculate precisely, but nuclear power and offshore wind farms are the two most expensive methods of generating electricity, while oil from the Middle East is the cheapest. As a result of these uncertainties, factors other than costs are increasingly important. Other disadvantages include the production of nuclear waste that poses long-term dangers to people due to its intense radioactivity. No long-term storage plans have been proved. Although underground storage in salt deposits is the most likely method.
Can displacement be defined in more than one dimension?
More often than not, you have to define a displacement in 2 or 3 dimensions. As an example, suppose you want to locate a house that is 160 feet west of 1st Avenue and 200 feet north of Main Street. The displacement is a combination of 160 feet west and 200 feet north.
What is a third-class lever?
Simple machine with pivot at one end or bar, the effort force exerted at the other end. The input force between the two, ma less than 1.
How did Luigi Galvani's experiments lead to the development of current electricity?
Galvani believed that the flow of charge from the nerve into the muscle caused the contractions. His fellow scientist at the University of Bologna, Alessandro Volta, 1745–1807, recognized that Galvani's frog leg was both a conductor and a detector of electricity. In 1791 he replaced the leg with paper soaked in salt water, a conductor, and used another means of detecting the electricity. He found that charges flowed only if the two metals touching the paper were different. The combination of two different metals separated by a conducting solution is called a galvanic cell after Galvani. Volta went further. He found that the two metals that produced the greatest electrical effect were zinc and silver. In 1800 he stacked alternating discs of zinc and silver, separated by a card wetted with salt water. He found that this device, called the voltaic pile, was a continuous source of charge flow. Sir Humphrey Davy showed that the charge flow was due to a chemical reaction between the metals and the conductive solution in the cards.
What is the principle of superposition?
When two waves overlap, they don't crash and destroy one another. Instead, they pass through each other without interaction. The graphs below show two waves approaching, overlapping, and moving away. They continue to move at the same velocity throughout. The arrows show their motions. The dotted drawings show the individual waves while the solid drawings show the resultants. The amplitudes of the two waves add together, producing either a larger wave if they are both positive or both negative. They produce a smaller wave if one is positive and the other negative. In fact, as shown, they can produce no amplitude at all. The large amplitudes are called constructive interference. The reduced amplitudes are called destructive interference.
What are elementary particles?
Study of the interactions and properties of the particles from which all matter is built.
How did probability rather than certainty enter into the model for the atom?
In 1926, the Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger, 1887 to 1961, published an equation for a wave function that describes the probability of finding an electron at a particular position. It agrees with Bohr's model in that the most probable radius for an electron is that given by the Bohr model. And the energy of the electron is the same as Bohr calculated. But its results are fundamentally different. The solution of Schrödinger's equation can be shown as a probability cloud that shows the most probable locations for the electron. The n equals 1 state of the hydrogen atom is small and spherical. There are two n equals 2 states. The s state has angular momentum 0 and another spherically symmetric cloud. The p state, with angular momentum 1, has two most probable locations, the top and bottom. The n equals 3 state has three possible angular momenta, 0, 1, and 2. The d state, with angular momentum equals 2, has four angular regions with high probability. Red light is emitted when the electron goes from the n equals 3p state to the n equals 2s state. The lifetime of the higher energy state is very short, less than 1/1000th of a second. So when many atoms emit the light, the energy they emit is spread out. The energy from any particular atom cannot be precisely predicted.
Does lightning always strike the ground?
Although most people think of lightning when it goes between Earth and clouds, the most common type of lightning occurs inside and between thunderclouds. It is usually easier for lightning to jump between the clouds than it is for it to jump from the clouds to Earth. As a result, only 1/4 of all lightning strikes actually strike the ground.
What is plastic deformation?
Objects' shape changed after deforming force is removed. See elastic deformation.
What is a parallel circuit?
A parallel circuit allows the charges to flow through different branches. For example, the wire from the battery would be connected to one terminal of each of 3 bulbs. The other terminals are connected together and to the negative terminal of the battery. The charges now have 3 separate paths through which they can flow. If one bulb burns out or is removed from the socket, that bulb would no longer light. But the current through the other 2 lamps would not change. They would continue to glow.
What is a diverging lens?
Has at least one concave side. The shape of the lens causes the entering light rays to spread apart when they leave the lens.
What is accuracy?
How correct or how close to the accepted result or standard a measurement or calculation has been.
When was the first atomic device exploded?
The gadget was a test version of the plutonium bomb. It was installed on the top of a 30-meter, 100-foot tower in the New Mexico desert at a location 35 miles southeast of Socorro, New Mexico, on the White Sands Proving Ground. The explosion, called Trinity, occurred on July 16, 1945. The energy yield was about 20,000 tons of TNT. More than twice what had been expected. The implosion-type bomb was much safer and more effective than the cannon-style Little Boy design and has been used for all other nuclear weapons.
What is subtractive color mixing?
Combining dyes, pigments, or other objects that absorb and reflect light.
What type of simple machine is a screw?
You can think of a screw as an inclined plane wrapped around an axle. The ancient Greeks used a screw to lift water. Screws and bolts are also used to fasten 2 pieces of wood, plastic, or metal together. Screws have a large mechanical advantage, and thus the distance the screw thread moves in its circular motion is much larger than the distance the screw moves into the material. Therefore the force the screw or bolt exerts to hold the material together is large in comparison to the torque used to turn the screw. Screws and bolts are also inefficient machines because of the friction between the screw and material, or between the metal of the bolt and nut.
What is the lowest possible temperature?
the lowest possible temperature is called absolute zero, 0 K. It is the temperature at which molecular motion is at a minimum and cannot be further reduced. While absolute zero can never be reached, see the third law of thermodynamics later in this chapter. The present record low temperature is 4.5 Nk, 4.5 billionths of a Kelvin.
What is a physics education research?
Study of how people learn physics and how best to teach them.
What is a sound wave?
Created by some type of mechanical vibration or oscillation that forces the surrounding medium to vibrate.
Why do closed containers sometimes dent or even collapse on cool days?
Just as a balloon can become smaller when placed under water. A sealed container can change its shape and even collapse under certain atmospheric conditions. For example, a container that stores gasoline for a lawnmower is usually sealed when it's not being used. If the container were sealed on a warm day, when there was little atmospheric pressure. Subsequently on a cool, high-pressure day, the gasoline container could be crushed. A second reason is that gasoline vapor exists in the tank. And at low temperatures more of the vapor condenses to liquid, reducing the pressure of the gases in the tank.
What is resistance to current flow?
All objects encounter friction when moving. Electrons are no different, but we refer to the friction that electrons encounter as resistance. The electrons collide with the atoms in a wire and are deflected from their paths. For the same voltage difference, the greater the resistance, the smaller the current. Resistance causes the electric charges to lose energy. The energy goes into the thermal energy of the wire or other conductor. That is, they get hot. The thermal energy can produce heat in a toaster and heat and light in an incandescent lamp.
What is a barometer?
Device to measure gas pressure.
What is chemical physics?
Study of the physical causes of chemical reactions between atoms and molecules and how light can be used to understand and cause these reactions.
How do the numbers of protons and neutrons in nuclei compare?
For lighter elements, the number of protons and neutrons are approximately equal. For example, the most common isotope of helium with 2 protons is 4He, so it has 4 to 2 equals 2 neutrons. Oxygen, with 8 protons, has 8 neutrons in its most common isotope, 16O. In elements heavier than calcium, 20 protons, 20 neutrons. The number of neutrons is larger than the number of protons. In uranium-238, 92 protons, 146 neutrons, the ratio is almost 3 neutrons for 2 protons.
How can infrasonic sounds provide early warning of tornadoes?
Using sound sensors that detect infrasound, scientists discovered quite by accident that the spinning core or vortex of a tornado produces sounds that are a few hertz below the human bandwidth of hearing. The tornado, much like an organ pipe, produces low frequencies when the vortices are large, and higher frequencies when the vortices are small. Since the infrasound waves from tornadoes can be detected for up to 100 miles away, they could help increase the warning time for tornado strikes.
What does it mean to say that an object is static?
Static means not moving. In the fields of engineering and physics, to be static means that the object does not move. When static, all the forces acting on a body must sum to zero. That is, the net force on the body is zero, so the object does not move.
Are there federal standards for using hearing protection?
Federal regulations mandating the use of hearing protection in the workplace state that if an employee works for 8 hours in an environment in which the average noise level is above 90 decibels, the employer is required to provide free hearing protection to those employees. For example, many high school and college students work for landscapers in the summer. Since the average decibel level for a lawnmower is about 100 decibels, and if the employees are working for 8 or more hours per day, free earplugs or ear muffs must be provided to the employees.
What is the Schrödinger's equation?
Equation of the wave function of a particle. Wave function is related to probability of finding particle at a specific location.
What is a critical mass?
Minimal mass of enriched uranium or plutonium needed to create a bomb.
Who developed gears?
as early as 2600 B. CE in India and other parts of southern Asia, gears were used to open and close doors in temples and to lift water. Around 400 BCE, Aristotle, 384 to 322 BCE, described how gears were used. Archimedes described worm gears around 240 BCE. And in 40 BCE, Vitruvius showed how gears could convert motion from a horizontal axle to a vertical one. In the 1300 CE, gears were used in clocks in bell towers and on churches.
What is the focal length of a lens?
The focal length measures the strength of a lens. Consider a converging lens. Rays from a very distant object come together at the focal point. The focal length is the distance from the lens to the focal point. Lenses with very convex surfaces have shorter focal lengths, while flatter lenses have longer focal lengths. For diverging lenses, the focal point is virtual. That is, it is the point from which the diverging rays leaving the lens would have come from if a point object were placed there.
What is an X-rad?
Next generation weather radar relies on the Doppler effect to calculate the position and the velocity of precipitation.
What is a plane mirror?
Flat mirror forms virtual images.
Which one goes faster?
You probably found that the one without the added mass sped up more. That is, for the same force, the greater the mass, the less the acceleration.
If you open your eyes underwater, can you see out of the water?
Another example of total internal reflection can be seen when you are underwater. If you look straight up out of the water, you will see the sky and any other visible surroundings directly above the water. If, however, you look out of the water at an angle of 48 degrees or more from the vertical, you will not see out of the water, but instead will see a reflection from the bottom of the water. The next time you are in a pool or a lake, try looking up out of the water and you will see a point on the surface where you no longer can see out of the pool, for the light has reached its critical angle.
What is a simple machine?
Device that matches human capabilities to do work to tasks that need to be done. There are four major groups: the lever, the wheel and axle, the pulley, and the inclined plane.
What determines the amount of energy required to increase the temperature of a substance?
The amount of energy needed to increase the temperature of a substance with a mass of 1 kg by 1 degree Celsius is called the specific heat capacity. For example, to raise 1 kg of water, 1 liter by a degree Celsius requires 4,186 joules of energy.
Are there non-contact field type forces other than gravity?
Both the electric force between charged objects and the magnetic force between magnetized objects can be described as the force caused by an electric or magnetic field caused by one object on the charge or magnetic moment of the second object.
What causes the flow of charges in a voltaic pile?
Volta invented the term electromotive force, EMF, to describe what causes the separation of charges. The more disks there were in the voltaic pile, the greater the EMF. Unfortunately, the word force is an incorrect use of that term. Because there is no mechanical push, measured in newtons, on the charge. The correct term is potential difference or voltage, the energy change per unit charge separated. Both the term voltage and the unit in which it is measured, the volt, V, are named after Volta.
Are there different names for auroras in the northern and southern hemispheres?
An aurora in the northern hemisphere, known as the Northern Lights, is officially called aurora borealis. While an aurora in the southern hemisphere, or southern lights, is called the aurora australis.
What happens if an object is not dropped, but is thrown up or down?
Physicists would say that the ball has been given an initial velocity. But this initial velocity doesn't affect the force of gravity on the ball. So the ball would still gain a downward velocity of 9.8 m/s each second it is in flight. Suppose the ball is thrown down with a velocity of 2.0 m/s. Then at time t equals 0, the time it was thrown down, it would already have a velocity of 2.0 m/s downward. If you use the table above, you see that 0.10 s later it would have a velocity of 2 plus 0.98 m/s equals 2.98 m/s. Half a second after launch its downward velocity would be 2 plus 4.9 m/s equals 6.9 m/s. That is, the initial velocity is just added to the increasing velocity caused by the gravitational force. Now suppose the ball is thrown upward with the same 2.0 m/s speed. Now we have to be very careful with the sign of the velocity. We have chosen the downward direction as positive. So the initial velocity of the ball is actually minus 2.0 m/s. The gravitational force acts in the downward direction. By Newton's second law, that means that the ball will slow down at a rate of 9.8 m/s each second. After 0.1 s it would be going minus 2.0 plus 0.98 equals minus 1.02 m/s. After 0.20 s it would be going minus 2.0 plus 1.96 equals minus 0.04 m/s. It is almost at rest. But the gravitational force is still acting on it. So it continues to accelerate downward. After 0.30 s it would be going minus 2.0 plus 2.94 equals plus 0.94 m/s. That is, it would now be moving downward.
What is optics?
Optics is an area of study within physics that deals with the properties of and applications of light. Optics can be used not only with light, but with other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, including microwaves, infrared, visible, ultraviolet, and X-rays.
What if you place a rock on a table? Does the table exert a force on the rock, or does it just block the rock's natural motion toward the floor?
If you put a heavy rock in your hand, it would sag downward because you would have trouble exerting the upward force on the rock. The same happens with the table. If the table is made of thin wood, it will also sag.
Why does a stone sink but wood float?
A stone is more dense than water. That is, if you compare the mass of a stone to the mass of the same volume of water, the stone's mass will be greater. Therefore its weight will also be greater, so a stone, weighter will be positive. And there will be a downward net force. Therefore the stone will move downward through the water until it rests on the bottom. Wood, on the other hand, is less dense than water. If the wood is pushed under water, weighter will be negative. There will be an upward force on the wood and it will rise.
What is weight?
Force of gravity on an object, F equals mg.
What is the Archimedes principle?
An object immersed in a fluid will experience a buoyant force equal to the weight of the displaced fluid.
What is gravitational field strength?
Ratio of gravitational force to mass of attracted object, G equals 9.8 n/kg.
What makes a fluid flow?
As in all of physics, objects move as a result of a net force. In a fluid, the net force comes about because there is a difference in pressure between 2 points. The fluid flows in the direction of decreasing pressure.
What causes motion?
Between 500 BCE and 1600 CE there were many other ideas developed about the causes of motion. Some said a stone fell because of the weight of a stone. Supposing that weight is a property of the stone. Others, saying the apple is attracted to earth, supposed, like Aristotle, 384 to 322 BCE, that there is a desire of an object to move toward earth. Others suggested that force is something that is transferred from one object to another, as discussed above. Still others, starting with Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519, wrote that force was an external agent that exerted a push or a pull on a body.
What are very high frequency, VHF, waves?
Frequency 30 MHz 300 MHz.
What is the relationship between current, voltage, and resistance?
Voltage equals current x resistance, or V equals IR. That is, the voltage difference across a resistor is equal to the current through it multiplied by its resistance.
What about pins, needles, and beds of nails?
A pin or needle has a very small area at its sharpened tip. So even a small force on it will create a large pressure at the tip, enough to penetrate cloth or your skin.
What is saturation?
Extent to which other wavelengths of light are present in a particular color.
How is an electromagnetic wave created and detected?
Electromagnetic waves are created by accelerating electrons that create an oscillating electric field. This field in turn creates an oscillating magnetic field, which creates another oscillating electric field, and so on. The energy carried by the waves radiates into the area around the moving charges. When it strikes a material whose electrons can move freely, it causes these particles to oscillate.
How are standing sound waves generated in musical instruments?
Many instruments depend on standing waves to produce their sound. Standing waves are created on the strings of a guitar, piano, or violin, and in the air columns of a trumpet, flute, or organ pipe. The string is caused to oscillate either by plucking it, pulling it aside and then letting go, or by bowing it, where the stickiness of the horsehair on the bow also pulls the string aside and then releases it. In a piano, a felt-covered hammer strikes the string, starting it vibrating. In a trumpet or other brass instrument, the player's vibrating lips create the traveling sound wave that is reflected when it reaches the open end of the instrument. In a flute or organ pipe that mimics a flute, the player blows air over a hole. The moving air interacting with the hole produces a periodic change in the pressure of the air inside the tube, which creates the traveling sound wave. In a clarinet or saxophone, the player blows through a narrow gap between a flexible piece of bamboo called the reed and the mouthpiece. Oboes and bassoons have two reeds separated by a thin gap. The stream of air causes the reed to vibrate, periodically stopping the airflow and causing the sound wave. In order to change the pitch produced by an instrument, the standing wave inside the instrument must be altered. By changing the length of a wind instrument, or the tension and length of the strings for a string instrument, a different frequency standing wave is produced, which creates a different musical pitch. Pressing a key on a trumpet inserts an additional length of tubing into the instrument. On a flute, clarinet, or saxophone, a hole on the instrument is covered or uncovered, changing the effective length of the instrument. On a piano, each note uses a string of a particular length. On a violin or guitar, the player's finger is used to change the length. Thicker strings have lower pitches than thinner strings of the same length. Increasing the tension on a string increases the frequency of the standing waves, and thus the pitch.
What is shear?
Scissors, also known as shears, use each of their blades to move the object it is attempting to cut in opposite directions. Thus they exert a shearing force on the object to be cut. Earthquakes often cause land and roads to experience significant shearing forces. Pictures of torn-up roads after earthquakes show how one side of a street moved one way while the other side of the street moved in the opposite direction, tearing up the pavement as the parts moved past one another.
What is the buoyant force?
From the equation obtained in the answer to the last question, you can see that when you place an object in water, its weight is reduced by the weight of the water displaced. The reduction in weight, object, weighter. That is the net upward force of the water, is called the buoyant force.
What is speed, v?
Distance moved divided by the time needed to move, scalar.
What is a magnetic field?
Just as the gravitational field is the region around a massive object that causes the attractive force on another object with mass. A magnetic field is the region around a magnet that causes forces on magnetic materials or other magnets.
What is the second law of thermodynamics?
It is impossible to convert heat completely into work in a cyclic heat engine. There is always some heat output. Also, heat doesn't flow from cold to hot without work input.
What is a de Broglie wavelength?
Wavelength associated with moving particle x equals h/mv.
Why do you feel an outward force on you when you are in circular motion?
When we introduced Newton's laws, we neglected to state an important warning. These laws work only in an inertial reference frame. That is a reference frame where there is no acceleration. A car, when it is speeding up, slowing down, or changing direction, is accelerating. Therefore, a person in the car experiences other forces. When the car is speeding up, you feel pushed back into the seat. When the car is slowing down, you feel yourself being pushed forward. When rounding a curve, you feel pushed outward. These are not real forces, but are often called inertial, fictitious, or pseudo-forces. For objects in circular motion, there are two such forces, the centrifugal and Coriolis forces. The centrifugal force is the fictitious outward force you feel when your car is rounding a curve.
What would happen if you had a multitude of pinholes at the location of the lens?
The reproductions from all the pinholes would be at the same location. And many more rays from the object would end up at the same place on the image. The image would be much brighter. So, you can model the formation of an image by a lens as a collection of reproductions of pinholes. The larger the lens, the brighter the image.
What is fluid dynamics?
Study of fluids in motion.
What is nearsightedness?
Also called myopia. Allows only objects relatively near the eye to be focused on retina. Images from distant objects are in front of the retina, so they are blurry.
What is a kilowatt hour? Kilowatt hour.
Unit of energy used to measure electrical energy.
What is a Bernoulli effect?
One of three causes of lift. Due to difference in air pressure on upper and lower surfaces of wing.
What is work?
Energy transfer by mechanical means.
If the air pressure is 101,300 newtons per square meter, why don't we get crushed?
Since our bodies have air inside them. The air inside our bodies is at the same atmospheric pressure as the air outside our bodies. Therefore, the pressures are equal and we can move quite freely in our atmospheric environment. The remainder of our body is mostly liquid water and cannot be compressed. The same cannot be said for divers. As the divers go deeper and deeper, the water pressure increases. At a depth of 10 meters, 32 feet, it is about twice atmospheric pressure. A diver can breathe in compressed gas to balance this pressure.
Who discovered that white light could be separated into the colors of the rainbow?
By the 17th century, glass makers had learned to make gem-shaped pieces that were used in chandeliers. Candle light was refracted in these pieces. When viewing the candle light, different colors were seen. Depending on the angles made by the light, the glass, and the viewer's eye. Newton, who was intrigued by the colors that were produced by those chandeliers, decided to examine how a piece of glass shaped as a rectangular prism could create a spectrum of colors. In his own words, in a darkened room make a hole in the window shade of a window, whose diameter may conveniently be about 1/3 of an inch, to admit a convenient quantity of the sun's light. And there place a clear and colorless prism, to refract the entering light towards the further part of the room, which, as I said, will thereby be diffused into an oblong spectrum. To prove that the colors did not come from the prism, Newton expanded the experiment by reversing the procedure and forming white light from the spectrum of colors. He accomplished this by placing a lens in the middle of the spectrum, to converge the colors on a second prism in the path of the colors. Sure enough, a beam of white light emerged out of the second prism.
How is a wheel and axle similar to a lever? What is a wheel and axle?
It consists of a disc, the wheel, attached to a thin rod, the axle, so that the two rotate together. Typically the input force is applied to the outer edge of the wheel, and the output force is exerted on something, like a rope, attached to the outer edge of the axle. If the two forces are exerted in the same direction, then it is like a third-class lever. If the two are in the opposite direction, for example, a person pushing down on one side of the wheel while a rope is pulled up on the other side, then it is like a first-class lever. One may also have the input force exerted on the axle, in which case it is like a second-class lever. Both the lever and the wheel and axle are really torque, not force, multipliers. Recall that if the force is at right angles to the line from the axis of rotation to the point where the force is applied, then the torque is given by Fr.
Who is considered one of the most influential scientists of all time?
Many scientists and historians consider Isaac Newton (1643 to 1727) one of the most influential people of all time. It was Newton who discovered the laws of motion and universal gravitation, made huge breakthroughs in light and optics, built the first reflecting telescope, and developed calculus. His discoveries published in Philosophic Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or the Principia, and in optics are unparalleled and formed the basis for mechanics and optics. Both these books were written in Latin and published only when friends demanded that he publish. Many years after Newton had completed his work,
What is a thermostat?
a device that is part of a system that maintains a constant temperature.
What does the car interact with?
When it is not moving, it is touching the road, and thus interacting with it. When you press on the accelerator, the engine causes the wheels to rotate in a direction that, because of friction between the tires and the road, pushes backward on the road. By Newton's third law, then, the road pushes forward on the tires and the car accelerates in its forward direction.
What is a volt, V?
Unit of measurement of potential difference or voltage.